different opportunities that are available for riparian funding and how to access them. I'm going to ask that you hold your questions until the end of the funding session after our third presenter. So our first presenter is Carson Moscoso, who I know well. Carson has been the non-point source pollution grant coordinator with Ecology's water quality program since October 2022. Prior to joining Ecology, he spent 7 years as a restoration practitioner with the Snohomish Conservation District. Carson has designed and implemented hundreds of acres of riparian buffers during his time as a project and grant manager. Please welcome Carson.
Thanks, Julie. Hey everybody, thank you, Julie, for the introduction. One thing to note really quick, I have 8 minutes to get through our funding program, so it's gonna be fast. So hold your questions like she said, and happy to dig further. So to start, wanna say that, so Washington Department of Ecology, I'm in the water quality program. We run a combined funding opportunity annually every year, applications in October. And the thing to note is that our funding eligibility is based off of the policy side at Ecology that they publish what's called the Clean Water Guidance for Agriculture. And so this is a policy document that gets approved by the EPA. They recently, last year, published an update to that about riparian buffers. It's this chapter 12, for those of you who are not familiar with that yet. And that chapter proposed a significant change to buffer recommendations from our previous guidance that followed the NIMS buffer table. And so the main change kind of follows what was shown on a slide, I think in the second presentation this morning, of WDFW's recommendations of following a riparian management zone concept. It was very, very quick, but it was on the slide, and I'm going to get into it a little bit in a few minutes. But to note, that's the guidance that Ecology uses to inform our funding program, which is where I work in. And so we update our funding guidelines every year to align with what our clean water guidance recommends. And so for riparian buffers, it's part of this appendix that we have in our funding guidelines. One thing to note, for all of our non-point projects now, there's no match required. We changed that rule two funding cycles ago, so hopefully people have enjoyed that change. One other highlight, our maximum amount per funding application is $500,000, and you can see all of the eligible non-point activities, riparian planting, of course, being one of them, is in our funding program in this section here that you can find on your own time. So to shift specifically to our riparian buffers, these are kind of the 4 attributes that inform what the buffer widths should be for our funding. The big difference from our previous guidance is this bankful width instead of fish use. Fish use is important, but our funding is used for water quality improvements. And so our policy team spent years updating our guidance document that I just talked about, and their recommendation was to shift away from fish use and to focus on bankful width to determine what, how wide things have to be. So anyways, shifting to our buffer options now, we've gone away from the NIMS table, and we have 3 different buffer options that are all eligible for our funding program. And the first one, this is our preferred option. This comes from Fish and Wildlife's. All their work is this fully forested riparian management zone, which is set at a site potential tree height And so for Eastern Washington, that's based on ponderosa pine. Our default site potential tree height riparian management zone, or RMZ, is 150 feet. That's what we prefer. That's what we want people to do, understanding that there's a lot of scenarios where that is not going to work. We have two other options that we will also fund. The first alternative, or our second option, is this 3-zone buffer with agroforestry activities. I'll get into that in a slide or two. But our third one, probably what's going to be most popular, is also a 3-zone buffer that has other intensive uses in those outer zones of the riparian management zone. So here's a graphic of our preferred option. This is a full riparian management zone buffer. This is your typical riparian forest buffer that has all the same stuff that you've been applying in the past. So for Eastern Washington, you can assume this is 150 feet wide from the dash mark to the waterway. And so this is the preferred option. However, we do fund two other options. Both follow this kind of 3-zoned RMZ concept that we have. And so what this does is it breaks down the riparian management zone, this 150-foot wide buffer, into 3 different zones. The most inside zone is this core zone. This is our traditional riparian style work. And so just like any other opportunity that you've done in the past, that's what the same type of work is going to happen. And then we have this inner, or what we call middle zone, so hopefully it's a little less confusing, is in between this core zone and what we are calling the outer zone, which is hopefully fairly clear. It's the most outer zone of the riparian buffer. And so in this second option, here we show an example of, this is our core zone buffer, and this is our normal riparian buffer planting. And then this inner or middle zone would be some sort of agroforestry buffer. And our clean water guidance describes exactly what what can apply in this. And then this outer zone is going to be a filter strip, typically. And so in Eastern Washington, our core zones standard is 60 feet, and then the rest of the 150 feet can be that mix of an agroforestry buffer and a filter strip buffer. Our third option is this same here again. Core zone is normal buffer width, and then inner zone is usually some sort of filter strip, and then other activities that are listed in our clean water guidance could happen in here. Could be fallow pasture, could be some sort of livestock use that implements water quality best management practices. And here, probably what everyone's waiting for is a table showing what these core zones, those mandatory buffer widths, are going to be for the core zone. For intermittent and perennial streams is where we often work on. It's based on bank full width. And so small streams, 50 foot, kind of regular streams, 60 feet, and then those larger streams and rivers is 100 feet. Understanding that in some areas, the climate water potential may not allow those taller trees to grow, we have a separate buffer table that has different widths there if you can't get what we call riparian forest potential. And I'm running really low on time, so I'm not going to dig into that. It's in our guidance. The last thing I'm just going to say is that we do have an ecosystem service payment program if people plant the preferred option. And they're also eligible for extra maintenance funding. So there you are. I'm right on time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Amee Bahr. Amee joined RTO in 2014 and now is the SAM and Grants Manager. Amee's experience includes nearly 23 years working in the environmental field, conducting wetland remediation and restoration work, identifying Washington native plants, and managing native plants. There's a Bachelor of Arts Bard's degree from the Evergreen State College in Olympia. Amy has lived in Washington most of her life and enjoys hiking, dancing, and time with family.
Thank you, Julie. All right, good morning, everyone. As Julie said, my name is Amee Bahr. I am a grant manager with the Salmon Recovery Funding Board, and I have found that presentations are much like performances. So you make it look pretty, you practice your material, you know your choreography, that's why I have my notes, you smile, and at the end, everyone claps, so you know your job. All right, so now you know who I am. We're going to talk about riparian funding with the Recreation and Conservation Office. And so this funding is part of the climate control, or excuse me, the Riparian Restoration Program is funded through the Natural Climate Solutions account as part of the Climate Commitment Act, which was passed by the Washington Legislature in 2023. You can find more information on our website at rco.wa.gov in Manual 18 and with your local lead entity coordinator or your grant manager, like me. Today we're going to cover these topics. And again, we only have 8 minutes, so I'm not going to go over them. All right, so the primary objective of the Surfboard Riparian Program is to fund projects that improve riparian areas above the ordinary high water mark within the floodplain along lake shores, estuaries, and marine nearshore, which you all don't have here, but they enhance conditions necessary to sustain salmonids throughout their life cycle. This shows the funding that is available to the regions for the 2024 grant round. If a lead entity is unable to fully obligate its riparian funding after the 2024 grant round, it will be available either to carry the money into the 2025 year or transfer its allocation to another lead entity. RCO is tracking this riparian funding separately from our other funding as it has a distinct grant application in PRISM, which is our database system. You can select the riparian program funding in your PRISM application on the program and project type page, and all the projects need to meet the riparian requirements that are listed in Manual 18, Appendix M. All right, so we're gonna run through these pretty quick. What types of projects are eligible for the new riparian grant program? They're listed on this slide. These can be proposed as individual or in some case combination projects. Please note that site-specific planning design for in-stream elements or the riparian enhancement plans, which we'll talk about a little later, are only allowed as part of restoration projects, and it is capped at the 30% AA&E costs. So we're going to step through these project types one by one. So acquisition projects with 50% uplands or less are eligible for the riparian grant funding. The area proposed for acquisition can be a subset of a larger acquisition project, but the riparian habitat conservation area cannot exceed the 50% uplands. So talk with your grant manager before scoping an appraisal to make sure that you can segregate the values of the larger parcel to document the fair value of the riparian grant conservation area. Riparian habitat projects include the following eligible activities listed on the slide. Please note that riparian project does not have to involve planting, but your project must show that the primary goal and objective is to restore and enhance functions of riparian habitat that directly benefit salmon. RCO highly encourages site potential tree height, but it is not a requirement for the riparian projects. If you're proposing invasive species control, your work must directly contribute to the establishment, survival, or protection of native riparian vegetation to benefit salmon recovery. If this is the sole work of the grant, indicate why invasive species control alone supports salmon recovery and is the best way to achieve a healthy riparian function at the site. Unique to this riparian program is the funding for temporary on-site nursery development or off-site nursery operations to provide plants for a specific restoration project. Riparian stewardship grants provide funding for maintenance, monitoring, and adaptive management at sites planted from a previously funded project. Evaluate the original project plans and the objectives, and then identify the adaptive management that you're going to use going forward. Your riparian enhancement plan, which we're going to discuss a little later, is an important part of your grant application. So be sure that it is updated to reflect the maintenance challenges for the project that the project seeks to address. It's always interesting seeing your slides somewhere else. Like, this isn't quite how it looked on my screen, so apologize for the slightly off-kilter things going on. So the following stream activities are eligible, in-stream activities. We recognize that a highly degraded site may require more than just vegetation-related activities. So if work is needed to reconnect the floodplain or to site hydrology or to streams and rivers, it may be included as a project cost. The key in that is that the primary goal of the project is to restore riparian function. So in-stream elements must be considered necessary to restore those riparian functions. Please check with your grant manager to make sure that you're meeting eligibility requirements, and consider your surfboard staff and our technical review panel as a resource to help you vet those in-stream elements. Okay, I'm not gonna look at the slide because it's distracting me that it's off kilter. All right, so design projects are not eligible for riparian grant funding as a standalone project, right? So you can't actually have a design project for this. However, those design costs that you might need for some in-stream elements are an eligible riparian restoration cost as part of your AA&E. Hold on just a second. Let me get this. Okay. So riparian assessments may be proposed as a sole project type unless an exception is approved for an assessment which is a necessary first step to restore an acquisition project, for a restoration or acquisition project. All right, so these assessments focus on riparian habitat and are typically larger in scale at the reach or watershed level and must directly lead to projects that can be implemented in the next phase. So total funding for standalone assessment projects may not exceed 10% of the region's allocation. Lots of words on this slide, so apologize for that. When scoping your project, you need to think about what project type best suits the work that you propose and what you can accomplish in 4 to 5 years, and you plan to begin the work in year 1. So you may propose a single or multiple work sites, and in the interest of time, I did not include a slide on geographic envelope projects, so please reach out to us if you want to do a geographic envelope project. Match is not required with the riparian funding. I repeat, match is not required for the riparian funding. Woo, we're all excited about that. However, indirect is an ineligible cost for this program unless there's a federal nexus. So the riparian grant funding may be combined with other surfboard funding if the work proposed is eligible in both funding programs. And this may be a special case where you may be required to provide match. And lastly, riparian grants cannot be used as match for surfboard projects. We all depend on the success of these projects. So to promote best practices, we ask sponsors to attach a riparian enhancement plan to the application. Appendix M in our Manual 18 includes detailed guidance for these components, and they align with the program requirements. We include an example of the riparian enhancement plan on our surfboard webpage, and please note that developing the riparian enhancement plan is an eligible pre-agreement AA&E cost to a restoration project. So include this expense. We do require items 1 through 5 at site visits, and if you're doing a stewardship project, we ask that you have all of them. Just a quick application timeline. It's an annual timeline. It opens up in January. Each lead entity has a different timeline, so definitely check in with your local folks to make sure that you're on track for your grant application. And I believe that is all the time that I have. I'm going to leave you with that. And thank you.
Hey, our next speaker is Shana Joy. Shana is the Soil Conservation Commission's Regional Manager Director in the current program lead for the Soil Conservation Commission's new riparian grant program. Upon graduating, she holds a BS in Natural Resource Management from OSU and spent the last 15 years in various positions pertaining to natural resource conservation, conservation districts. first in Alaska at the AKDNR, and now for nearly 10 years with the State Conservation. Welcome, Shana.
Good late morning, right? It's rough being between you all, and great questions. We have a lot that has been presented here with the three of us and your lunch, right? So the Riparian Grant Program at the Conservation Commission is new, and this is my first time at this symposium. So Shana Joy, I have a great long title that really tells you nothing about what I do. The important thing right now is I'm the current lead for our Riparian Grant Program, and we have a position open and we are hiring. So I'm going to shamelessly plug that to all of you in the room. Check out our website for more information on that. Let's dig right in. This program was new to us coming out of the 2023 legislative session and also funded by the Climate Commitment Act. We're using one program to implement two pots of funding. So $25 million devoted to a voluntary riparian grant program itself, and also $3 million for outreach. So you'll see in this program that outreach is an eligible project type. Our current funds expire June 30, 2025, which is a challenge. We understand that. We do intend to go back to the legislature and ask for any unspent funds to be reappropriated beyond this date. And we also anticipate asking for additional funds to keep the program going. So please don't let that date hold you back if you have project work to do. So I want to plug our program webpage. You'll also see we have a booth out in the hallway with fact sheets and more information, but we're really using this webpage to deliver all the parts and pieces to do with this Riparian Grant Program. So if you haven't bookmarked this page yet, please do so. We're going to put updates, all manner of things as time goes on, and we really get this program going on this webpage. So it's a great way to stay connected with what's going on at the Conservation Commission. So eligibility, the primary way that the Conservation Commission funnels funding is through conservation districts. The great news is there's a conservation district in every part of the state. So if you're not familiar with your local partner, reach out and make contact. Districts can work with any local partner to implement a project. We just work through conservation districts, and that's an efficiency move for us and the district. So districts are eligible for our program, all land ownership and all stream types. So if you haven't, a bit of an odd duck that couldn't fit into another program, this might be a way to get at that project. Now, specific restrictions apply for tiered incentive payments to landowners. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a moment, as far as ownership and stream type. So tiered incentive payments, hold that thought. Eligible project types. So here's that education and outreach again, available to increase landowner willingness to do this kind of work. Sometimes that's a hard nut to crack. Technical assistance, planning, monitoring, design, we sort of lump that all together into one eligible project type. Landowner implemented cost share is where we would reimburse the landowner a percentage of implementing the project themselves. District implemented projects are when conservation districts take on full responsibility to install and maintain the project. We have those two different types there. Finally, maintenance. I think you're all familiar with what maintenance would entail. Tiered incentive payments and permanent protection is also an option, but we haven't fully fleshed this out yet. It could look like a conservation easement, could look like fee simple acquisition. More to come on that eligible project type, probably in the next iteration of the program. So eligible practices, we wanted to make sure we put all the tools that might be needed in the box for successful riparian restoration projects. So that could be site prep, that could be actual installation of a riparian buffer, in-stream practices, livestock exclusion practices, and maintenance practices. So the stars on the in-stream and livestock exclusion are because we want those things to be tied to a successful riparian buffer installation, right? So we're not going to fund livestock exclusion fencing in a watering facility by itself. It has to be linked up with riparian buffer restoration at the same time. So we were given a really interesting, long prescriptive budget proviso from the legislature, and I'm going to summarize this. They basically said, don't reinvent the wheel on how you prioritize these projects. Look at all of the processes and planning that's already been done out there and reference that. Don't create a whole brand new thing. So what you'll see in our program is a number of places that you can tell us, where does your project or proposal fit? And this can include all of the things that you see on the screen, but I want to call attention to other local prioritizations. So if you got together as a group with locals and you all decided this spot's a priority for this and this spot's a priority for that, tell us that in the application. We want to hear that. Or if there's a gap in your prioritization locally and you haven't really gotten down to the riparian buffer level, you can apply for technical assistance funds to do some of that prioritization together. So calling a little bit of attention there. You get more emphasis if your project has tribal support, if you're talking to us about how you're planning to address environmental justice, if you're grouping projects and practices together to get bigger bang for the buck. And finally, if you're addressing work on a 303D listed stream. So tiered incentive payments. Tiered incentive payments are annual payments made to a landowner for participating in riparian restoration, and that can be a 10 or 15-year time frame. This is new for us. You'll find a lot more details on how we calculate those and what that amount of money could look like in our program guidelines and on our website. Our buffer widths have a minimum and a maximum. We rely on the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service for minimums based on stream type, so they're really site specific. And we're also shooting for Department of Fish and Wildlife's 200-year site potential tree height as the maximum. But we have some flexibility in there based on the site and what a particular landowner is willing to work with you to install. So I also want to call out here, if you have an existing buffer with some measure of function already going on there, maybe it was installed under the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program or EQIP, those are not eligible for tiered incentive payments. Monitoring and adaptive management is built into our program because we know that right out of the gate, it's not perfect. Nobody is thinking that this program is perfect, and we want to refine it based on lessons we learned going along in this current biennium. So annual monitoring is required by districts as long as there's funding available of those project sites. And then we're planning to do a more deep dive technical monitoring about every 5 years. And every biennium, we routinely review and update our program guidelines to address hurdles and challenges that have come to our attention. That was a lot, right? That was a lot. You're like, whoa, what? What is the commission up to? This was like a TED Talk on our riparian grant program. So I encourage you to grab a fact sheet from the booth. If you don't know your local conservation district, reach out. Can I get a show of hands? Who are in the room from conservation districts? These people are your new best friends. Get to know them, partner up, work together on projects. And don't hesitate to reach out to me at the commission if you're just like, I have a great thing and I don't know where to start. I'm happy to help connect you to your local CD as well. So with that.
Okay, so we now have 15 minutes Q&A before lunch for our riparian restoration funding presenters. And please note that afterwards we have an optional extended Q&A session. It's going to be available at 1 p.m. right here. We're kind of in a grouping here. So.
Just don't all ask at one time.
See a hand in the back.
At least from the RCO standpoint, we have these funds in hand. The future is undetermined.
What she said.
That's my plug for.
Yeah.
Pardon? Correct. Yes, and for RCO, that includes the riparian program funding at $25 million, and then we're using that money for targeted investment projects as well.
Yep.
And just a side note, like I heard some discussion on monitoring, effectiveness monitoring. And on our website where we have our riparian enhancement plan, we also have a fact sheet that has some resources, including some monitoring protocol for riparian projects.
And I just want to say we're not trying to do completely 3 separate different things here. We're trying to dovetail and collaborate where we can. So a lot of the technical resources that you'll find on RCO's webpage are also folded into our webpage as well. So if you grab one of us on the web and start digging around, it will lead you to the other 2 programs too.
This is the easiest Q&A session. Yes, Julie.
I want to ask each of you if you have more than 8 minutes, what would be interesting?
I would have talked about the other. Other than what I said. Also talked about and fun, so like fencing, in-stream work, same kind of stuff that they talked about. We also fund.
I tend to be pretty wordy, and I did not actually, the slides that we developed were a collaboration, and others are more wordy than me. So I really pared it down quite a bit and tried to cover the essentials, but you know, I probably would have made more jokes.
Riparian jokes, that's a tall order. I would have talked a little bit more in the beginning, just given our audience, about what the commission is and does, because we're a little bit new coming into this program spot with these 2 agencies that have been funding a lot more of this work in the past, and about what conservation districts are and kind of how each of you can make that tighter partnership work really well for doing your project. So I think I would have talked a little bit more about that.
So I'm curious with the monitoring.
Yeah, so I'll speak just from the RCO perspective. So one of the things that actually, after Julie said this, I was like, I probably would have spent more time on. So we've developed a riparian enhancement plan, which is a little different than normally for our agency. And in that, we really are trying to get at those current site conditions of the area. So not necessarily monitoring, but asking our sponsors to really look at what the site is historically and currently, so that they can kind of develop practices that are going to encourage the riparian plants to establish. And the effective, it's a 5-year. We only have 5 years, but that, you know, change. The power of the people is really important, and so I'm going to encourage folks to kind of take this out into the world and really put pressure, or not pressure, but encourage their local political folks that this is important funding and that we really need it for riparian projects, and that we need it to go longer, because we know that plants take a long time to establish, and 5 years is not enough really to kind of get an idea of how successful the project site is going to be. So we're looking at setting this up so that people can have a plan that allows them to know what they're going to be doing in the future, how they're going to measure that success, and then showing it going forward. So that's kind of where we're taking it.
We're really looking at what other agencies have done and weaving that together with the Natural Resources Conservation Service conservation planning model, which looks at, you know, what does the landscape look like when you come in and you start. And so there's that foundation, but we're also working on a worksheet or a checklist for conservation districts to help us gather that baseline condition before they start a project, and then on an annual basis, what's going on with that project. So we can adapt. Maybe we need to fund different things. Maybe we need to move our guidelines around. Maybe we need to innovate with wool pellets, right? What is the thing that we need to do to keep becoming more and more successful?
For Ecology funding, so 3 years, all of our restoration sites funding 5 years. you have to continue to come back to get more funding. But the sites are eligible to do that. On the front side, some of our folks have been really savvy on, for like a project, they'll go ahead and they'll have the planting happen, but they'll also take some of our funding to they'll apply for funding next round. And so you can kind of get at what you're talking about with like projects like assessment work a couple years. Yeah, that's encouraged. I mean, there's a dollar threshold probably that you know when you evaluate this. Our focus every time is we'd like to see more information. Other work. Again, if you pair that with the project that you already have, that can be work that happens.
This question is for Amy. I'm working with a newly established community and recovery collaborative. So maybe you can talk about eligibility, working under newly entity, going through the process of collecting, we're doing data gaps analysis, a model that's going to identify and prioritize project areas. That's probably not going to happen inside 5-year window. Are we still eligible for apply for projects that we haven't been identified by that entity yet?
First of all, I'm super excited about this Spokane lead entity. I just want to can we just give a round of applause? Because that's really big. That's also my home turf, so really, really happy for that. That is not a question that I think I can answer, unfortunately. My understanding is that it has to be current lead entities that are already established, and that is Spokane lead entity establishment, not in my wheelhouse, sadly, fortunately. Great. So I would maybe talk with Jeannie about that. I know that the allocation formula has not been changed to include Spokane yet, and so that really is going to kind of drive it. If you really wanted to apply for something in this grant round, it might be beneficial to work with the Pend Oreille lead entity and see if we collaborate on something like that. That would be, in the future. Yes, absolutely. We can't wait to have you all.
This question is for
Carson.
Is that change expected to be permanent, or is it?
That's permanent.
Is that specifically with the Riparian funding, or just across the board all?
It's our non-point funding.
Okay.
So we run a combined funding round that includes every October folks can submit for non-point, stormwater, wastewater, on-site septic work. Our non-point, all of those activities have been.
We love match modernization. Super exciting. So does Jason. We know this. I'll speak up first, I guess. So thanks, Greer, for that. I think that the riparian funding is allowing projects that maybe didn't rank well or didn't score well in local areas kind of rise to the top now because they have a designated funding pool. I have seen some innovative things. Yes, fencing is an eligible cost, and one of the requests that we've had this year is for virtual fencing. If you are not familiar with that, it is kind of like invisible fencing for dogs, but for cows. So it keeps cows out of riparian areas and allows you kind of to track them. I think it's brilliant and super excited about it. So I was a hard yes on that. But I do think that we're just seeing a lot of projects that are slightly more focused on planting, more focused on low-tech engineering things for elements, and then coming back to project sites that have kind of been abandoned for several, I don't want to say abandoned, that's not a good word, that have been left on their own for several years. And now you have an opportunity to kind of go back and say, what worked, what didn't work, what can we replant, what can we do differently. So I think that's what's encouraging to me.
Yeah, and kind of building on that, districts are now able to take a more programmatic approach to riparian restoration and pick off a number of activities in our program that we weren't able to fund in the past. So you see a lot of that coming back around to sites that maybe they've worked on in the past where maintenance funding ran out for whatever reason, and they're able to come back and sort of revitalize those and also tackle new riparian restoration projects as well with a lot more lessons learned under our belts collectively. So it's really exciting. Also, we have staff in Jody over here. I'm going to put her on the spot to say hi, but she's working on a riparian outreach statewide campaign and just really working with conservation districts and everyone out there to raise awareness of this important work and how everyone can contribute to that, even if they're not, a landowner right next to a stream. So there's a lot of, I think, things right on the horizon, Greer, that are really exciting. Virtual fence is super cool. The other half of my brain is the Shrub Step initiative. So it's kind of interesting to see these two things come together too. So.
No hard ones, Alex.
Project applies, so 2 acres here, 5 acres. One application for the first. Do you see any room going forward to work with partners as you develop identify priorities? Not with multiple grants. To keep up that kind of shift in the paradigm a little from the project piece.
I don't want to speak for everyone else, but I'll say absolutely. And I think we're all used to the things that we fund and the programs that we administer, and we each have little bit different strings that we have to, be mindful of. But I see a lot of ability to match up what RCO is really good at funding with what the Commission's really good at funding with what Ecology is really good at funding, so that it's easier to put together a whole project that isn't so labor intensive to apply, to get through the hurdles, to get the funding. We're working on matching up better the time frame that our funding is good for with what RCO is able to do and with some things that Ecology has been able to do on the ground. But I'll just admit for myself, I won't speak for Amee or Carson, we're bureaucrats. And there's a lot of paper and things that we do behind the scenes that are boring, that help get the money out on the ground. So I think keep bringing that to us. Don't let us off the hook. Keep asking us, what about this? Or I see a challenge here. And we'll keep working on that as our 3 agencies, because ultimately we want to see the work get done on the ground.
Yeah, I guess I'll just add, I'm a grant manager. My strings to pull are very limited. in the higher capacity of life. But I do think that what I've seen in the last 20 years is this kind of rising tides lift all boats scenario where we're all in this together. And instead of this mine is mine and yours is yours, we're like, no, how can we make this better for everybody? I know that we just hired our habitat policy specialist. Elizabeth Spalding's going to be coming to RCO, and I kind of see her as collaborating all of those policies and kind of overlapping them and seeing where we can fit them all together. So, yes. Okay,
We made it. Yep.